Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Just really excited to be speaking with my guest tonight. I'm going to be bringing him on in just for your 1 second. We're going to be talking about his book, Smile of the Universe, Miracles in the Age of Disbelief. And it's Dr. Michael Grosso, and I'm going to be bringing him on just right now. He's just signed in into the live stream. So, Dr. Grosso, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, except my ears are. I just bought these pods, and all right, I heard myself. Can you hear me clearly now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, okay, because it's all right. Okay, I can hear you loud, and so it's working. I just bought them. I was told that the last time I had to stick my face right in the machine, and before I could be heard. So I was hoping this was going to work right, but you hear me clearly. Good, great.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I was just talking about your book that we're talking about, The Smile of the Universe. And so can you hear me okay, or is that?
It's too loud, actually. Is there any way that I can lower that a little bit? It's blasting almost.
Let's see if I can. I don't have a way to lower it on your side. Maybe on your computer, if you want to lower the volume on the computer, because it's coming through your actual computer audio into your.
Oh, okay. Let me see something here. Wait, maybe. Wait, how's that?
Yeah, I'm
is that better?
Yeah, for you, is it better? It's still loud?
Yes, for you in terms of, no, that's okay now. Now I can hear you, right, and you can hear me okay. Perfect, all right.
Definitely. So I was
We're ready to go.
I'm ready to go. Pretty excited talking about your subject here. I was just actually thinking about, because we're talking about miracles, and I think it's interesting your subtitle is Miracles in the Age of Disbelief. You know, because one of the questions I was going to ask you is like, well, first of all, what exactly got you into studying the concept of miracles in this time frame? You know, what inspired you to do that research and go down that road?
Well, it's an interesting story. First of all, I guess when I was a kid, I heard stories from my mother about Padre Pio and other strange. That kind of warmed me up to it, even though I grew up sort of independently of the church, not against it, but not really into it. So there was in my background a lot of occasional talk about miracles, and in addition, I started to read the literature. And one day in a class, I performed an experiment with a group of students. It was a class about human potential, and we were studying all kinds of consciousness and psychedelics and methods for expanding consciousness. And anyway, to make a long story short, one of my students suggested we try a levitation experiment, and based on a game that kids used to play called Light as a Feather. Never played that game when I was a kid. But so it consists of basically trying to lift somebody after a group of people have sort of chanted and breathed together. So we had been chanting and meditating. So I thought, okay, we'll give it a shot. I didn't think anything was going to happen. So we got a 200-pound ex-Marine sitting in a chair, and 4 young ladies touching him on elbows and underneath his knees, just with the under part of their fingers. And I suggested that we chant together and breathe together for a few minutes, which we did. And then I said, lift. And I'll be darned, Jeremy, if this huge guy went straight up into the air as far as the young women could raise their hands, and I'll never forget the look of utter astonishment on his face. And then gently he came down. He should have come crashing down by the law of gravity and being so heavy, but he didn't. And it was rather like poltergeists, which float around and never quite break. The objects that get thrown around often are not broken. So that got me interested in levitation. And I decided to do some research. And the reason I like the idea of levitation is precisely because it's such a challenge to modern science. In other words, there can be no doubt if you see a human being up in the air without any natural explanation that a fundamental law of nature has been placed into suspense to explain it. And science is challenged by that. So that's how I got launched. And so I wrote a book on levitation, and from there I decided to do some heavy research in a whole variety of miracles, and thus came up with this book that we have before us. So that was just my own experience and an experiment that I performed. I'm still, by the way, I should say that I tried to reproduce that experiment several times. I never succeeded. It was something about the rapport of that class that made it possible.
Yeah, the energy or whatever you guys built, and that's it.
Yeah. But how to explain it? That's a real challenge to science. I mean, a real challenge. On the other hand, I have physicist friends who say that it may be possible, after all, to begin to explain these things in light of quantum mechanics, but don't ask me to do it. I'm not a quantum physicist.
I've interviewed some quantum physicists before, so maybe we'll have to ask them. I think that's super interesting. So, like, I could just imagine this class coming together, and that this person levitates, this man levitates, and I don't know. I've been studying phenomenon of metaphysics for a long time, and still things, when they happen, I get excited, and of course there's a part of me that's like, wow, this is really happening. So I'm sure at that point in time, you're probably very excited at the time.
Oh, it was astonishing. And by the way, it was a team taught class, so I had a colleague in the room with me who witnessed it, and that was nice. So it wasn't just the teacher and the student. There were two teachers, and no, they were flabbergasted. And so it's quite a fascinating thing to witness. And then when you get into the history and the literature, it turns out that there's quite a bit of this stuff going on. And there are all kinds of almost levitation kinds of experiences that take place. I can tell you some stories along those lines if you're interested. But anyway, that's how I got started.
Absolutely. I would definitely be interested. I'm fascinated by that. So, well, how did you get into? I mean, what exactly do you mean by miracles? Because there's a lot of different. There's the spiritual miracles. Somebody's healed, and you really get. You ask for prayers.
Right.
And stuff like that.
Right. There is the word is used in many contexts. We talk about the miracles of science, the miracle of life. It's a miracle because we don't really understand the origins of it yet. So, however, here's how I define precisely what I mean by a miracle. Even though I use the term somewhat loosely, there is an underlying precise sense. The first is just rhetorical. The word smile is rooted in the Sanskrit word miracle. So that's where I got the title. But the real challenge of miracle, so that's the rhetorical side of the word that I use to get people's attention. But the technical meaning is that, broadly speaking, any event for which there is no physical explanation. And so, in a sense, miracles are equivalent to the paranormal, as the concept is used precisely by scientists. So that's how I understand it, and so that there are major miracles, and I was very interested in research in looking at the most extravagant, the most shocking, the strangest stuff, only on the condition that there was good evidence for it, so as to make the entire presentation a little more impressive on the imagination. There are minor miracles and major miracles, so I went for the big stuff. But again, I want to emphasize to listeners, only when I knew that there was solid evidence for the reality of this stuff. Because at the bottom of it all, I think we need to challenge mainstream science that seems to be, generally speaking, for various historical reasons, reluctant to admit the reality of miracles, or the reality of anything that you can't explain physically.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really valid point there, because I was thinking, I went into I had a shared death experience probably about 8 years ago, and I really dove into that subject because I really just wanted to understand the experience. And what I found is, of course, modern day science, this phenomenon that happens, they want to say things like it's a lack of oxygen because they're trying to explain, but a lot of their explanations don't even actually make a lot of logical sense. And so, and one of the basis of, I think, philosophy, because I think that's what your background in is philosophy, from what I understand,
right,
is there has to be some kind of
yeah. I missed what phenomenon is. I didn't quite get it.
Oh, a shared death experience.
Oh, a shared death experience. Yeah. Okay, yeah. That's really interesting stuff. Raymond Moody wrote a book about that.
He did, actually. Really, I had the experience, and I actually didn't know who he was. And I went. He happened to be lecturing about 3 weeks later after I had the experience. And I met him and asked him, and he was like, "That sounds like you had a shared death experience," because I didn't know what I had. And I interviewed him a few times on the show, but it was like, but what I found super interesting is like what we're talking about is that modern science, anything that is not explained, and I'm kind of thinking, like, how do we get them out of this paradigm of looking at other things?
That is. Well, I think there are two possibilities. One is intellectual honesty. You face something that you don't understand, you've never had the experience, but if there's evidence for it, you go for it, you take it seriously. The other thing that happens more readily and more frequently, the breakthroughs usually come from people who have to. And that's unfortunate. I know scientists who have never had a psychic experience, but they have read the literature and they've spoken with other people. And like any other form of evidence, they accept it. But the most of the people that I know that are committed and deeply into the research have often had their own experiences. And that was the element. So how do we make Harris? That's something. I can tell you this. I know something about the history of the subject, and it's never changed. There has always been a minority of reports and of experiences and of extraordinary individuals that have had extraordinary experiences, but there is always the population, especially in modern times when you have scientific training, that simply doubt it. But the majority of more educated people tend to back off from the miraculous, the supernormal, the extraordinary. As ordinary folks, which I consider myself, although I'm a little, have some knowledge, instinctively seem to be open to and fascinated by the extraordinary experiences. But people with an ideology that suggests that stuff is retrograde or associated with superstition is inherently anti-scientific, which it isn't at all. These folks, for some reason, have a rough time of opening up to the extraordinary. Unfortunately for them, I say, they're missing out on a great stimulation and a great intellectual challenge. That's how I see it anyway.
Well, it's interesting too when I think about the fact that people like Pythagoras and Socrates and Aristotle, they a lot of their theories of their philosophies are the start of modern day science and language and everything else. So it kind of makes you wonder why modern science has come so far away from these ideas that were talked about thousands of years ago.
Right. You gave a good example of Socrates. Socrates is generally regarded as the father of philosophical rationalism, right? On the other hand, he claimed that throughout his life, he had a daimon, that's the Greek word for a spirit guide, that it never told him what to do, but it always inhibited him to do something wrong. And there are all kinds of interesting stories of how this might have happened. There's one story, he warned a bunch of his friends not to go home by a certain route because they were going to be splatted by a bunch of pigs. Strange, warning. They laughed at him and went on their own way, and they were all splattered by a bunch of wild pigs. So that's just one little anecdote about Socrates' psychic ability. And yet, there he was, the archetypal founder of philosophical rationalism. So there's no inconsistency between being scientific, rational, fact-based, and yet totally open to extraordinary kinds of facts. But, it's a slow process waking up.
Yeah, I think it really is. I think that I love these subjects because it really starts to open up our mind. I mean, when you think about things like What the Bleep Do We Know that came out 17 years ago, that really changed a lot of people's way of thinking. The work you've done and stuff like that is really starting to wake people up to the ideas that there's more than what their five senses can tell them or show them. So, other physical
I think so. Yeah, I do think so. I think there is a growing trend of interest here, but then again, instant throughout history, and it would be a great turning point if, at this point of our history, scientists and generally responsible people began to wake up to these phenomena. It is interesting that this very, very, very recent, the New York Times has been opening up about the reality of UFOs and unidentified aerial phenomena, UAPs, as they're sometimes called. So that's a very interesting shift and change. As it turns out, counts of so-called UFOs are shot through with all kinds of paranormal phenomena, levitation, telepathy, healing stories, and then again, some UFOs are actually linked up with spiritual phenomena, and believe it or not, apparitions of the Virgin Mary have some weird connections with UFO phenomena. So, strange place full of mystery, and it's with the information that we have at our beck and call nowadays, it's possible to, it's conceivable that large changes in attitude may be underway after all this. That's my optimistic feeling for the moment.
Yeah, I think it's exciting times. I get excited when I think about it. Or the more deeper I get into my study and stuff like that. One of my favorite miracle stories is Myrtle and Charles Fillmore, and about how they were both very sick in the late 1800s when they started studying. And I believe Myrtle was actually 6 months away from her death. And then through their practice, they lived another 40 years and started the Unity movement. And so, that's pretty phenomenal.
Oh,
go ahead. I was interrupting you. Sorry.
No. I'm listening to your comment.
So I was just going to ask you if there was any, like you talked about the levitation, which I absolutely think is phenomenal. Any other miracles that are kind of your favorite stories that you liked that have really inspired you? And
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm fascinated by healing simply because they're so practical. I mean, and to begin with, there's a form of healing or unexplained healing phenomena that's really quite I'm sorry, quite commonplace. And I'm talking about the placebo phenomenon. I mean, this scientists are constantly showing that the placebo belief, you see, has healing power. So, for example, I'll give one case that I like to mention. Uh, People who take various kinds of medications for depression, it's been found that the placebo is almost as effective as your average, whatever it is that you're taking. I don't know the names of them because I don't take them, but I know the tests have been made, and repeatedly the placebo, and for listeners who maybe not know what it is, the placebo is a non-medical treatment in which the only healing factor is the belief of the patient. The patient believes he or she is being given that has healing power, and the stronger that belief, apparently, the more stunning sometimes the healings are. So that fascinates me. That's one area, and there are more spectacular kinds of healing phenomena in the literature associated, for example, with Lourdes, the apparition of the Virgin Mary that took place back in the 19th century. It has become a healing shrine. People travel there constantly, millions all of the time. And of course, there are few extraordinary miracles because they're very carefully documented and studied. But every now and then something happens that's so completely mind-blowing. There's a case of Pierre de Ruyter, for example, a Dutchman who has been suffering for 8 years with a gangrenous leg that no doctor could heal for 8 years. And he finally got enough money to go visit Lourdes. And on his way, he stopped at a place called Oostaka, where there was a very plain, ordinary statue of the Virgin Mary. And he stopped in front of that statue and he said a short, humble prayer to the Madonna. Would she help him so that he could be able to work? Family. That was it. Instantaneously, he was healed. Now, I don't expect you to believe this unless you read the literature. And I mean, I talk about it in my book. But it's one of the more marvelous stories of healing because so many people know about it or knew. Everyone knew that he finally was able to make this trip. Everybody knew he had this this horrible condition that lasted for 8 years, and many people took care of him. So he was a well-known figure in the where he was living. He had doctors, serious doctors, were looking after him. So they knew when he came back that very same day, walking after 8 years of staggering about in pain and anguish, it caused a sensation and became a major event in the history of Europe at that time. And of course, came out and insisted it's a lot of baloney and so forth. But it's one of my favorite stories because it's so shockingly total in its effectiveness. Although, most healings are not quite that spectacular. Sometimes they take a while. It was instantaneous. It makes it far more inconceivable because even if he was healing, if something happened that suddenly healed him, you would tissues, the swellings, the pain to gradually, ease off and cease to be. In fact, the entire thing, he couldn't believe it. He just stood there utterly staggered by what had happened to and walked home without his cane. And of course, there were witnesses there. He was with his wife when this happened. And when he got back, the town, the doctors were made. So all of that is written up at great length in the sources that I rely on to get these things, and I have a discussion of it in my book. So that's another thing that's fascinating me, is because there is a current wave of them, at least in the 1990s. I haven't been following it, but stories of statues and paintings that, and here again, this is shocking and strange, but that bleed and weep. In other words, stories of materialization, but they're associated with sacred objects and statues. And I would, since I've mentioned materialization and in the modern times, I'll also mention dematerialization. In 1995, there was an extraordinary one-day phenomena that took place all over the world, where there were hills and statues of the elephant-headed god, whose name is Ganesha, the god who wipes away all obstacles. And the story about this, which was in the news, and it was all over the place for a while, was that an Indian in India had a dream that the god spoke to him and said, "I'm thirsty, I want milk." And so he rushed out and brought, as was often the case, milk to feed in a little cup to the statue of Ganesha. And holding it in front of the statue, he watched the milk disappear slowly. By the end of the day, this over India and all over the world where there were statues of that particular god. And the good news for me as a researcher is that I watched it, I witnessed the miracle on CNN. A British reporter who had heard about it, because it was taking place all over the world. This thing was a big thing on that day. I think it was the 21st of September. I watched him hold a small cup of milk. The camera focused right on and I watched it slowly but completely disappear. It took about a second or two. And I also will never forget the look of total astonishment on the face of that reporter. And then to add to this story, if I may, I had 2 Indian students that came to one of my classes around that time, and they too witnessed it. And one of them, smart young man, went on the line 3 times, or maybe it was 5 times, he told me, I can't quite remember now, to convince himself that this was a reality. And each time the same thing happened, the milk disappeared. So he wrote me up a detailed report of what he saw. So it's a fascinating phenomenon, and it's almost as fascinating to me how quickly it was forgotten by the world at large. And of course, there were many folks that came up with some really totally stupid attempt to explain it away. Something about the capillary action of the material of choose. It somehow performed some tricks on and made that milk disappear. There's one devastating critique of that totally worthless explanation. It happened one day. All this only happened one day. So if this explanation would apply, why didn't it happen many times before and many times since? Never did. See. So anyway, those are some examples of some of these phenomena that interest me. And I'm focusing on the physical phenomena because they're so, in a way, even more challenging than the strictly mental phenomena. Although I'm not even quite sure if that's true, but at least for me, I'm impressed at the idea of a man floating in the air against the law of gravity. It's so obvious and so shocking to see that it's a real challenge.
That's a great story. I want to actually point out, because somebody's asking in the comments what the name of your book is again, and I'm going to say it's The Smile of the Universe, Miracles in the Age of Disbelief by Dr. Michael Grosso, and it looks just like this. So, you know, for those you were asking just a second ago, you know, I was just thinking because before we came on, I was thinking about this place I go to here locally. I live in the Tampa Bay area, and there is a little church up in Tarpon Springs called the Shrine of St. Michael. And I just thought, I don't know why I didn't. I thought you might enjoy this because basically, the story goes that her son was really, really sick and taken to the hospital at St. Joseph's in Tampa. And he was about an 11-year-old boy, and he started getting this vision of speaking to Archangel Michael. And as a result, he's in the dream he was having. His mother just thought he was crazy, or just an 11-year-old boy having a dream. And he said, "Mama, if you heal me, would you build a temple for, Saint Michael?" And he said, she said yes, thinking that's just her 11-year-old boy hallucinating. But then she realized that it was very, very real. And so as a result, he says, "Mama, you have to take this seriously because by 10 a.m. tomorrow, I'll be cured." And so by 10 a.m. the next day, he was cured. And so she went to build the shrine for him. And the shrine has had many people go, and they've been blind and walking onto the property and come off seeing. So I was thinking about the placebo and how we were talking about that, and people with prayer and stuff like that. Or I know the placebo also talks about the sugar pill and then the actual pill, some of the exercises they did. But I think a lot of times with a lot of the miracles too, like what you're just saying, is like even with this story with the Shrine of St. Michael, you know, there might be some extra or outer being or spiritual being, but I think a lot of it has to do with what you mentioned, the placebo and the belief in something, you know, in the mind just really powerful. So.
Yes, I agree, but somehow I do feel that there is something outside that we're connecting with, some deeper level of the mind, some spiritual form. Maybe there is a sense in which the Madonna or Saint Michael are out there interacting with us. I mean, I don't know the ultimate explanation in the mysteries, that's for sure. But it does seem to me the key is the intensity of the belief, because in the case of the placebo, clearly it's just the belief. It's the character and the intensity of the belief is what explains the beneficial effect. It's not the placebo, because as you said, just a sugar pill. There's nothing there. So, but that may not all of the most extraordinary healings, such as that instantaneous healing of Pierre de Ruda that I mentioned. I would be blown away if a placebo could accomplish something like that, especially if it could do it on a regular basis. But maybe what the science can help us do here is to learn how to believe. I mean, the whole question of belief, what does that mean? To say belief did it. When you believe and when I believe, and different people may believe, different degrees of intensity, there may be different characteristics in addition to the belief that come into play that account for the effectiveness of the placebo. So here's something that, you know, we need to study, and I think that we are very much in need of an improved health paradigm in our country, and so we should be looking at this stuff and understand what is going on, especially in the cases where the healing is so astonishing and remarkable. How is it possible? What's going on? So that's one justification for doing this kind of research, which is not and it raises doubts in the minds of many people, but understandably so. Because
Absolutely. Well, you know, I'm thinking about this year, especially 2020. You know, there has been a lot of uncertainty this year, and I've been doing a lot of shows on this because of the pandemic, and not just because of the pandemic, but also our economy, not just the country's economy, but the global economy as a result of the pandemic. Do you think that when we're talking about miracles, like how does that go in relation of to what's going on today? I mean, and how does somebody induce a miracle, so to speak? I guess is the question.
Right. That's a great question, and I try to discuss some aspects of that. But I would say something like this: that extraordinary things happen to people mentally and spiritually. Stress is very high. The example would be, you already noticed or mentioned the near-death experience. But actually, you don't have to be literally near death to have a transformative experience. Many people who are victims of acute anxiety, for example, who are just suffering from the fear of death, and they're not actually near death, or circumstances where people are lost where it seems totally hopeless to them. It often happens that these breakthroughs of consciousness take place. Extreme solitude, which is an interesting point in terms of what's going on today. A lot of people are spending a lot of time alone. I'm one of them. I happen to live alone, and so I don't have a big family or anything. But solitude may very well be a circumstance that enables us to concentrate our minds more effectively and to tune in to the healing and powers that are latent within all our minds. I'm certain that as human beings, we all possess these potentials. That may be an act of faith, but I don't see any reason to doubt it myself. So I have a feeling, and there are already signs of it, that despite this being a terrible period of our global history at this moment, it's also one of the most amazingly challenging periods of time. And I think that we may be witnessing the beginnings of a new age activity, because we're going to have to be very creative to deal not only with the epidemic, the pandemic, but with other serious, life-threatening and global challenging dangers, such as climate, the encroaching climate catastrophe, the growing risk of nuclear war, and the other factor that strikes me as totally destabilizing on the planet today is the wild disparity between the rich and the poor. It can't go on forever like this. It has to give way. Things are going to change. And I think that as horrible as the circumstances may appear today, my exploration of the world of miracles gives me some, only in this sense. I mean, I'm not naive. I don't think think it's going to suddenly clear up everything. But we're in a state where the likelihood or the plausibility and the challenge to grow and evolve is mounting and accelerating in so many different ways that, given the innate creativity of the human spirit, I feel that we should be thinking in terms of more hopefully and more actively seeking to be inventive and explore ways of liberating our full potential as human beings, and above all, coming together because there is something about the paranormal, the group dynamic entailed in miraculous phenomena. I mean, sometimes it can happen just to a single individual in an isolated circumstance. More often than not, there is a tradition of groups of people with powerful beliefs, often which share similar types of challenges. And so both the individual and the collective can be drawn upon in terms of summoning up the creative powers. And I don't think this will happen. This will happen in all kinds of unexpected, surprising ways, I believe. But the value of pondering on our extraordinary human potential is simply that the more we're aware of what is in us and what is possible, the more likely that we will respond to the clues, the hints, the signs, the indications that something creative and marvelous is happening. So in that sense, that's how I would make the connection.
It's interesting you say that, you talk about the group dynamics, because I'm thinking about some of the things that have just happened in recent history. I mean, when adversity happens or major things happen, even going back, 19 years ago when 9/11 happened in the United States, and it's even though everybody was shocked, there was a huge coming together. I found it was very interesting, and that's kind of that group thought. And then even in the biblical sense, there's actually a passage in the Bible that says, "When two or more gather in my name," and it's saying the power of the Father will be behind them. And it really kind of starts thinking about a group consciousness or a spiritual consciousness that is flowing through all of us. And some, of course, people believe that's oneness or Christ consciousness. There's a lot of different theories on that. But I think that's part of it as well. So when we're talking about waking up the world.
Well, that passage you quote, I think it's from Matthew, is something that I have noticed and thought about many, many times. It's a role of paranormal group dynamics. So there has to be some kind of belief, shared belief. Similar things like, you can even see with the Ouija board, there's a kind of illustration of that. Most people don't sit by themselves and play the game with the Ouija board because the pointer tends not to move. But if you have a group of people, you sense of I'm not really doing it, you see. In other words, there's a thing called owner inhibition when it comes to producing side effects or miracles, if you like. It's frightening to think that one has extraordinary power. But if you're with a group, you kind of allow your own power to sink into the group identity, and it's less distressing and less challenging to yourself, and enables you perhaps to relax enough to allow the process to take place in a group setting. So that's a very interesting. That's part of the answer to your question of a while ago, in exploring ways of inducing these throughs. You can do it on your own. Many a mystic and shaman is out there all on his own or her own, but we can also do it together. And so, yeah.
It's more fun together, too. It's more fun together.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I said it.
Yeah, for sure.
So do you think that you have to believe in God or have some kind of religion or experience in order to experience miracles? Or does it doesn't seem like we need to, based on what we've been talking about.
Yeah, no, I don't think that that the conscious needs to be present. But what often happens after an unusual thing occurs, that it faith, or it might open people up to believing. I also think that belief in a lot more powerful being, it opens us up more readily. If you have that belief, it's a don't have a sense of I have to do it, my limited mortal weak self, but rather the belief in a greater being, whether we call it God or simply a greater mind, which I talk about in my book, that has, I think, liberating effects. And it's no accident. Some of the most marvelous miracles of all time are, in fact, associated with religious beliefs. It is the religious statues of the Madonna that weep and bleed. It's the Ganesha, the Hindu deity, removing mover of obstacles that initiates this monster global phenomenon back in 1995. So on the other hand, the monk, the shaman, the Native American out on the vision quest by himself or herself, things happen when you're on your own. And I've had a lot of strange experiences completely by, and so both ways it's possible, and might as well be aware of all the different ways that it is possible. That's my approach anyway.
I think my final question for you is a question in your press kit that I actually want to know or talk about, is just to explain the hypothesis of the mind at large. And I think I know.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just saying.
You think you know?
Well, I was just starting to think. I think I have an idea, but I would just kind of want to know.
Okay, yeah. Well, just to elaborate on that a little bit, we all believe we have minds, but the normal everyday view is that our mind is a byproduct of our brain, and it's personal. But there are many reasons to doubt that simple characterization, and there are both philosophical and factual reasons that suggest that our minds are in fact linked and part of one mind. When you think about the nature of the mind in contrast to the nature of anything physical, think mind, your thoughts, your feelings, your memories. Can you cut them up into bits and pieces? It's impossible. It makes no sense. It's not, unlike this water here, or my glasses. I can break it up into fragments, but we can't break our minds up. Our minds are not, and the reason is they're not in space. Think of what's going on inside your mind right now, your feelings, your thoughts. They are linked, probably out in some way to the brain. How, it's not altogether clear. But whatever they are, they're not in the brain. If you have a dream that you're sailing a boat in a beautiful ocean, no one who pries open your brain is going to see that boat because it's not in this. So if our minds are not in physical space, there are no boundaries separating them. And if that's the case, all our individual minds are rooted in a larger, greater mind, which has more power, more wisdom, and more to draw upon. And I perceive that the great religions of the world, the shamanic mythologies and yogic systems and all that, from different cultures and different times and moments and periods of history, have all drawn upon the one universal mind that aids our entire existence, our entire reality. And of course, the drawing upon that mind and the characterizing of it in symbols and devising ways of accessing its through ritual and prayer and meditation and all the rest, and mythology, it differs from age to age and culture to culture, and that's all right. It's like, all artists are into the theme of beauty, let's say. That's what it's all about. But there are innumerable styles and ways of a painting. Medieval art is not the same as abstract modern art, but it's all art. It's all a visual exploration of the creative imagination, and so that's how I feel. That's my understanding of mind at large, and this greater mind. And I have to say that I arrived at this belief slowly. It took me years. At first, when I started as a student in philosophy, I was pretty much a materialist. And I thought, okay, my mind is a byproduct of my brain. And so what the heck is the hope of it surviving death or doing much on its own, because it's just a kind of an attachment of the. Eventually I realized that's just a false interpretation. And step by step, I've come to the conclusion that my mind, your mind, all our minds, maybe even the minds of the lower forms of life, are all rooted in a single one great mind. And with that knowledge, I feel then we can move on to the next question is, if that's the case, then surely it must be possible to interact, or a dialogue, as I like to put it, with this transcendent mind. And so that to me is a positive vision and an optimistic one, if we can develop a deeper understanding of the possibilities of our relationship to this mind at large, or this greater mind, which of course has been done already in the history of religions. So it's not like I'm just talking about this from a rational scientific perspective. In no way meant to destroy or undermine the valid traditions of the human race, but we're in a scientific age and we want to understand even the nature of miracles, if we can, a little bit. We can't a great deal, but we're making some progress, I think, in gaining an insight.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Grosso, it's been amazing speaking with you. I was just wanted to point out, I think your website, I have it in the description of the show. So everybody, if you want to go to Dr. Grosso's website, and I want to point out again that his book is called Smile of the Universe, Miracles in the Age of Disbelief. And I just want to ask one last thing, is like any last minute thing you want, thoughts you want to give the audience before we kind of end for the night.
Yeah, well, I would say work on being as open-minded as you can. And don't be afraid to dare to imagine the impossible and the extraordinary. Would be my advice.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. This is my Thursday show. I'm going to be starting. I'm starting back up again, and then I will be back on Monday night at 9 o'clock. And this has been Dr. Michael Grosso, and this has been a wonderful talk this evening. Much love, everybody.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Jeremy. I enjoyed it a great deal.
Absolutely.